trying to figure out why the hell they would do this. Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization, NACI, coming out for some reason after governments had already said in this country it's okay to take the AstraZeneca vaccine if you're over the age. First it was 50, then it was 45, and then saying that, perhaps not the best idea if you're over the age, I think they actually said of 30, and said consider if you can getting one of the others first.
Depending on where you live and how high the rate of infection is where you are. If there's no COVID where you are, then sit tight. Don't worry about it. Caroline Quash is so amazing, and yet everything went so wrong in that interview.
It was really a question of why bother? Why would you even bother saying that? We're trying to get people vaccinated, and this is just going to make some people, A, be even more leery than they already are, and B, if they already got the AstraZeneca vaccine, imagine how they're going to feel now hearing this, right? Dr. Raywat Deonandan is a epidemiologist and science communicator at the University of Ottawa, on the line right now. Doctor, first of all, with reference to what NACI had said on this, was that a mistake to say that or not?
They're not wrong to express this sentiment, but they did it in a clumsy manner, and probably they should not be speaking to the public directly, in my opinion. NACI's purpose is to give guidance to healthcare workers and to vaccine managers, program managers, and they're not really used to issuing guidance to the public. Of course, during the pandemic, everyone hangs on their every word, and so word choice is important, and they did not choose their words well, and so they're creating, as you put it, a lot of distrust, a lot of confusion, and it was not well chosen.
You got to wonder who in the government should be, I mean, with respect to regulating, you're right, these are announcements that you would typically think would be made to professionals and not simply to the public. Whose job should that have been to simply say, you know what, let us know it and we'll disseminate the information the way it should be?
I think the provinces. So my understanding is that no one is bound to accept NACI's recommendation. These aren't bound by law. Provinces can do with the information what they choose. And the provinces can choose to ignore or to adhere to NACI's recommendations. It's their job then to enact policy and, in my opinion, devise the communication strategy for how it should be understood, because they've got the resources and the expertise to do so.
Doctor, in your opinion piece in the Gazette, you say something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, so bear with me here, but you say something along the lines of lots of people prefer Perrier to flat water, to tap water, but if you're dying of thirst, you're going to take whatever is offered to you. Is that the situation we're in right now?
For some people, yes. So the point of the article is words matter, and the word preferred really bothered me when the NACI representative said that, because preference is determined by situation and circumstance. I made reference to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a famously one-shot vaccine, and it's well stored in better temperatures than Pfizer and easily transported. So for remote communities and people for whom getting a second dose might be difficult, like the homeless, that is the preferred vaccine. And if you are in a hot zone area with a high risk of getting COVID or a high risk of having complications from COVID, the preferred vaccine is the one you can get right now, the tap water, not the Perrier. So preference is a loaded term, and we have to understand what preference means in the context of lived experience and your particular environment.
Let me ask you a question that has nothing to do specifically with this, but you in your position as an epidemiologist, you've probably heard, I imagine, the same question. We've heard it here a couple of times. When we deal with people who've decided for whatever reason not to take the vaccine, one of the questions I get is, well, I'm not taking it because I don't know what's in it. As if somehow if they knew what was in it, they could make an educated decision as to whether they should or shouldn't take it. So how do you deal with that as a question? What do you say to people?
I say, do you know what's in the hot dog you ate yesterday? Do you know what's in the can of pop that you drank? We put things in our bodies every hour of every day that we are ignorant to, and yet somehow this one thing we are ultra skeptical about. I understand why. It's a needle entering your bloodstream directly, and you feel okay. Usually when we take medication, we are accepting of a variety of risks. If you ever read the label in a bottle of aspirin, it's terrifying sometimes, but you feel sick and you want something to solve that problem. With a vaccine, you feel good, and you're wondering, why do I need to put something in my body that might make me feel worse? So there's a conceptual leap to understand that there's a risk floating out there in the form of an invisible disease that you have to protect yourself against.
So I will ask then the other follow-up to that, okay, and that's a great answer, which hopefully will appease some of those people. What about the other one? We had a caller actually today say, look, I'm not a COVID denier, and I'm sort of on the fence right now. He was of an age, he was, I guess, late 20s, early 30s, so he'll be eligible to take that vaccine as in Quebec as of today. He said, but I'm not sure, and I don't know what the long-term effects are. And my answer to him was, I mean, naively, I'm not a doctor either. I said, look, what do you need? How long is that window? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years? When do you make up your mind to say, okay, now I'm comfortable enough to say I'm going to take it because it's been long enough?
Yeah, that's a good answer. And we have to be transparent and honest. We actually don't know what the long-term consequences will be because time has not gone by long enough. But one way around that is to look at large numbers of things happening right now. This vaccine is probably the most immediately distributed vaccine in the history of humankind. So rather than waiting years for consequences, we can look at the tens of millions of people getting it now, and any adverse signal will manifest from that large sample size. The other thing to consider is COVID. We know that the long-term consequences of COVID a year later are pretty dire. You definitely don't want that. So if that's on the other side of the scale, that should tip in favor of the vaccine.
So, Doctor, I fall into that category of those who rushed out to get the AstraZeneca the first day that I was eligible. There was a whole lot of us. We set our first vaccination record in Quebec that day because so many people were feeling the same way. And then with all the information that's continued to come out since then, there's been some doubt, right? There's been, like we said, some confusion with NACI and their remarks, and then just hearing that some are superior to others. So I think a lot of people might be feeling like we got the cheapo version of the vaccine. We somehow got a subpar one. Are we right to feel that way, or do we need to do away with that sentiment?
I don't think you're right to feel that way. And here's why. Even though you may have got it before you could have gotten a Pfizer or Moderna one, that time in between, you've been protected. Who knows what might have happened had you chosen not to be vaccinated? You might have got COVID. You might have died from COVID. We don't know. It's hard to quantify what didn't happen. Also, for the other people who have the luxury of waiting now, because as the incidence rate drops, the risk of getting COVID gets lower, therefore the risk of getting a consequence of AstraZeneca, a negative consequence, becomes higher relative to that lower risk. That's because people like you went out and got vaccinated. The lower risk experienced by the population is because you went out and accepted the minute risk of AstraZeneca. So consider yourself heroic, in my mind, right? So you did your part to get us out of this quagmire, and you protected yourself for weeks in advance. Otherwise, you would not have been protected. That's a really clumsy sentence, but you get what I'm saying.
I like it. I like the sentiment of it, and I will say that you do have that feeling of whatever vaccine you get, that you're just on the right side of history, that you're being proactive and helping somehow.
Yeah, and also AstraZeneca is the vaccine of the world, as I put it. It's non-profit, so it's dirt cheap. It works well. It's stored at an easy temperature and transported well. So it is the vaccine that will get most of the world out of this problem. So it's desperately in need in places like India and Brazil. So we shouldn't disparage it too much.
By the way, just as a final question, you as a doctor, as an epidemiologist here, when you hear people who are COVID-19 vaccine hesitant, what do you think? How do you react?
Well, first of all, I distinguish between those who are hesitant and those who are anti-vaxxers. The anti-vaxxing mentality is a religious kind of position. It's devoid of evidence. Those who are hesitant, I have all the time in the world for. They just need some hand-holding and me to walk them through the risk scenario. So I'm sympathetic. I get it. I actually feel a little bit myself, to be honest. Some new thing being injected in my body, I get it. But we have to rely upon our understanding of the science and our appreciation of the genuine risk of the disease. It just takes time to walk people through that scenario.
Wow, great answer. Dr. Deonandan, I thank you. And by the way, just before you leave, I will tell you I'm seeing a story move just now. In the U.S., the FDA has now authorized the Pfizer vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds. So
Not surprised. Yeah.
There you go.
Excellent.
All right, thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.